he's making a point here, which is that as mortals, we're dependent on things. So, for example, there's one thing that kind of has to happen before any of this, which is that we have to have food, we have to have water, we have to probably have shelter depending on where we are. So there are these very basic human needs. And then after that, you'll see that most of our fears are based off of that. So, for example, we're afraid of death, and that's the ultimate thing. And that's why we have to have enough food, we have to have enough water, we have to have shelter, because if we don't have those things, we die. So first and foremost, as mortals, we have to be concerned with surviving, because if we don't survive, there's no mortals, and if there's no mortals, there's no discussion to be had at all. So survival becomes first and foremost. Now, you will find that there are times in life when we will fight for a principle and we'll be willing to die for a principle, or at least we may like the idea of that. But that's a choice at that point, which I'll say something about in a bit. So the number one thing on both these lists is mortals, we fear death, and the thing that we desire is a long life, because we want to put that death thing off as long as possible, because it is that unknown. Now, everything else that's up on this list of the things that we fear are generally related to that, and our need to survive, our desire to survive. We're afraid of rejection. Well, why? Well, a couple things. First off, because at a very primal level, if we're rejected by the people around us, then that means that we're rejected by our tribe, which makes survival very difficult, going back and living in the wild. Now, what I'm trying to get across is that there's a bodily or a physical demand here, which is we have to have food, shelter, blah, 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 but also we want to survive physically. But there's also like an emotional or even spiritual demand there as well. So when we see things like we don't want to be forgotten, why not? Why does it matter that we're remembered? Because we want our lives to matter. We want our lives to mean something. We want our lives to, at the end of all of it, to amount to something. And again, that's more like a spiritual, we could call it a metaphysical desire. And that's because there are these two aspects of all of us. Yes, there's the physical aspect of it, that's true. But if you only nourish the physical aspect of yourself, you're missing out on half of who you fully are. There's also a metaphysical aspect of it. You can call it your soul, you can call it spirit, you can call it psyche, whatever word you want to call it, it all kind of amounts to the same thing. And once that physical thing is taken care of, once there's an actual you to talk about here, well, now there's that deeper thing underneath there, which is the meaning. So we ask, in order for me to ask this question, why are we here? What's the meaning of life? There has to be one thing absolutely in place, which is I have to be here. I have to be alive. I can't ask those questions unless there's a me to ask those questions. So once I exist, once I'm alive, now I start to ask those deeper questions. Like, okay, so now that I'm here, like, why? What's the meaning of this? What's the purpose of this? And we kind of intuitively recognize that life is difficult, of course. We also recognize that life is very, very short. No matter how long it is, life is very, very short. And especially once you start to figure out all of the things that you want to do in life. And that's one of those ironies of life, is that when we're younger, we have all of these things that we want to do, but we don't have the ability or the resources or the experience or the wisdom to do them. And then as you get older, once you have more of those things, you have less time to do them. So in other words, the problem of life is not that there's nothing to do. The problem with life is that there's so much to do. And for most people, by the time you figure out what those things are and you have the ability to do them, well, at that point, for a lot of people, time is running out. Like I just saw a really funny meme, I'm trying to remember, I'll screw it up, but it was something to the effect of, I'm sure you guys have heard this, travel when you're young. When you guys are young, travel. As though you can just take your birth certificate to the airport and say, here, I'm here to travel. Yeah, travel, absolutely. But first things first, you have to have the money to do it. You have to have the resources to do it. So then you trade off some of your life to get those resources. Then as you get older, then as you're younger, you have the energy to do those things, and you don't mind staying in crappier hotels and eating cheaper food and all that. But then as you get older, you have more resources, but you don't have the same kind of vigor and energy to do those things. Hopefully you do. I mean, you don't want to get into like your 70s or 80s or 90s before you start traveling. Because then you get to experience them, but one of the reasons that we experience the world is so that it can change our lives. And hopefully change our lives for the better. It'd probably be better to have your life changed for the better when you're in your 20s than when you're in your 90s. Because you'll look back on it and say, wow, there's so much I could have done with this. And if I'd only known this so many years ago, you'll end up one of those people who's always saying, if only I knew, if only I knew, if only I knew. But I don't know that that's necessarily true. I don't know that it's that we don't know. It might be that we don't accept. That much can be true. Like when we hear from older people all the time the kinds of things that we should be doing. And so we do know, we just reject it. We don't accept it. And so why don't we accept it? Well, that's another time, but it goes back to what we talked about before, which is pride. Which is pride. And sometimes, a lot of times, most of the time, pride can interfere with your ability to lead an enjoyable life. We don't accept something. Why? Well, because of who said it. Or we accept something even worse because of who said it. In other words, we don't like a person, so we reject what they say. Even if what they're saying is full of wisdom. We do like a person, so we accept what they say. Even if they're just completely devoid of wisdom. But one thing that you'll find is almost universal is this desire to make this whole life thing worth it. That's why we ask that question, what's the meaning of life? What's the purpose of life? And then again, I know a lot of people, of course, who just say, you know what, we can't know. So I'm just gonna, you know what, I'll just take it day by day. That's a fantastic recipe for a meaningless life and a failed life. Talk to any highly successful person and ask them, so how'd you get here? Did you just kind of like wing it and go day by day and just take life as it came? Or did you plan? Did you execute? Like it was Eisenhower who said that in battle and in life, by the way, that planning is absolutely indispensable. You must plan. And yet planning is also completely useless. We want it to matter. We want it to mean something. All the things that you go through, you want it to mean something. If you're suffering for no reason, that's a very difficult way to suffer because you can't change anything about it. It's like, would you rather find out that the reason for all of your problems is you, or would you rather find out the reason for all of your problems is the world? If the reason for all of your problems is yourself, that's good, because that means you can change it, you can do something about it. If the causes of your depression, if the causes of your anxiety are out in the world, you are in deep shit because you cannot change the world. As much as we say, you can change the world, how many people in history really genuinely have? On a grand scale. Now, there are people who change the world. Well, actually, everybody changes the world by everything that you do. Whether it's good or bad, everything that you do changes the world just a little bit. You change the universe with every word that you speak. Literally, you introduce sound waves into the universe. You change everything. Everything that you interact with, you change. Everything that interacts with what you've interacted with changes, and so on, and so on, and so on. And it's a great deal of responsibility if you let it drive you crazy, because then everything that you do matters. But then that gives you a reason to live, a meaning, a purpose, beyond just living, but it gives you the metaphysical reason for going on. Like, why are we so afraid of failure? Because it indicates that we're not good enough. If we're not good enough, our lives don't matter. We're not as good as somebody else. Why do we envy people who have lots of money and are successful? Because it reminds us that, or makes us think anyway, that their life matters more than ours. And it may even drive us to believe that because I don't have that stuff, therefore my life doesn't matter. Now, can your life matter without stuff? Well, of course. And oftentimes we think like, well, but if I had that stuff, I could matter more because I could make a bigger difference. I don't know. What kind of a difference are you making right now with what you do have? Why on earth would you believe that you'd make a better difference if you had more stuff? If you had more money? If I had more money, I would help more people. Do you already do that with everything that you have? Because if not, I don't know why you think that you'd be better if you had it. You know, I'd be happy if only I had fill in the blank of something that's lacking in your life that you think is the cause for your unhappiness. And I don't know, how could you possibly believe that that's going to make your life better if you've never had it before? If we think like, oh, if I'm rich, then I would be happy. I don't know. Would you be? Because you've never been rich before, so I don't know how you could possibly know that or believe that. Well, if I only had a boyfriend or girlfriend, I'd be happy. If you've never had one before, or you've never had a good one before, how could you possibly know that? The thing about it is that every situation that you enter, you take one thing with you, and that's you. Will you be happy if you're married or single? What's the you that you're taking into it? Will you enjoy a class? Will you get lots out of that class? It depends 100% on the person that you're taking into that class. I hear this all the time when people complain about the teachers. All right, well, how many of your teachers do you actually like? And how many? But there's one thing: you take you into all of those classes. So what is it about that one? And besides which, whose responsibility is to get something out of it? You're tasked with that. Are there better and worse teachers? Absolutely. Are there better and worse students? Uh-huh. Yeah, we can have that conversation too. Are there better and worse students in terms of them being people, human beings? Well, yeah, of course. Of course. But what does that make? What's the difference in your life? You take you into every situation. So is the situation meaningful? Depends on you. If you find the meaning that's in it. There is a meaning in all of it. You know, if there's you talk about like if you take a chemistry class, is chemistry interesting or boring? That's going to depend on how you approach it, 100%. Because there are people who absolutely love chemistry, man. They live and breathe it. There are people who live and breathe geology, rocks, dude. There are people who find passion in rocks. And that means that they see something that you don't. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe we're tasked with finding that thing that's interesting, that's meaningful, that's purposeful. And you're going to find that all of these things start to take care of themselves. If you have a meaning and a purpose, you can suffer through anything. If you don't believe that, some of you go home and ask your parents. Because a lot of them are suffering through a lot of things in life that they really do not like because of you. Meaning they want better for you. Not that it's your fault, but that they're doing it because they want something better for you. Now my parents are a-holes, really? And then they'll people who say that will then like message their friends from their phones that their parents provided for to tell them what kind of a-holes their parents are. And wearing the clothes that they're wearing and eating the food that they're eating as they complain about all of this. I'm not saying that everyone's parents are angels, but then again, I'm not saying all of us in this room are angels either. But we're fast to criticize other people for it. If you find a reason for your suffering, why is it that we're afraid of being wrong? Because again, we realize that we come to think that means that we're deficient in some way. We're lacking something in some way. All of this is stuff that the gods don't fear, the immortals don't fear. Why? Because they're not afraid of dying. And if you don't have a fear of dying, then all of a sudden, all of these things are to take care of themselves. You have regrets? Yeah, but you know what? You can go back and you can do the situation differently next time. So if you're going to live forever, you're going to encounter a similar situation later. Are you going to feel lonely? No, because you can create. You can go be a monk. Are you afraid of failure? No, because you have infinite tries. Most of the things that we fear in life are connected directly to this idea that we're not going to live forever, that we are going to pass away. And that every failure is a lost opportunity, and it brings us closer to the end, which shortens our potential opportunities. So on and so on and so on. And then everything that we desire, again, is connected to that as well. We want a long life. We want money and power. Why? To make our lives matter. We want fulfillment, to make our lives matter. We want enjoyment and pleasure because we think that that's making our life matter. And none of these things at all. Gods want authority over things. And I don't even know if the gods want authority over things or if it's just the proper way that things should be. Maybe that's what they're seeking. They want things to be as they should be. Not as, I mean, think about that. If you're an immortal and you've got mortals coming along telling you how things should be, that's hilarious. It's like, what do you possibly know? The teacher sent out this thing last week. I was going to thrash them on it. Haven't had the time yet, though. It's one of those things that would probably take longer than it would be worth. And it was this person, as a quote from somebody who was talking about the current generation and about like this deep sense of morality that's in the current generation. And I just think, really? Do any of you like look around and really perceive that in your generation, or the generation before you, or the generation before you, or any generation when they're young? Like, how much time do we genuinely think about what's right and wrong? How much time do we genuinely consider what right and wrong even mean? And yet somehow we're supposed to believe that just by accident we stumble upon the right answer to those things. Just by happen chance. We can't just stumble upon the right answer to how to launch rockets into space, but we can stumble upon the right answer of what's right and wrong, and moral and immoral. When the only thing that we're really being encouraged to pursue is this enjoyment thing, this pleasure thing, this happiness thing. So, I don't know, man. I guess my sense is always like, I always hear people talk about little kids. Little kids are so wise. Dude, if you're an adult and all of your views align with little kids, guess what? You never did. Grew up. You never matured. You never deepened your understanding. If 5-year-olds have the answer, think about what the world would look like if 5-year-olds ran it. But a better question is, what would the world look like if you ran it? And that might be, if you can look at it objectively and honestly, that might be a really important way of self-assessing. So, we act like mortals in everything that we fear. All the things that we fear, there's a lot of them. But we act like immortals in the things that we desire. We want to be in charge. We recognize our inherent weakness. We recognize our inherent fragility. And yet we want to be in control. We want to run things. We want to decide how life is supposed to be lived. So there's a contradiction there. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do that. It just means first things first, figure it out. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms? Yeah.